In international news, Ivory Coast's presidential campaigning kicked off on Friday with young adults singing the virtues of their favorite candidates as they stood in front of poster-lined walls in the country's capital.
14 candidates are competing for the presidency in 31st October elections. The three frontrunners have all been unofficially campaigning for months, but the opening of the campaign period means that advertisement in print, on television and on the radio are now permitted. Incumbent President Laurent Gbagbo is running ahead in polls, followed closely by former President Henry Konan Bedi and former Prime Minister Alassane Ouattara. Meanwhile, the UN Security Council voted unanimously Friday to extend sanctions against Ivory Coast for 6 months, but said they could be modified or lifted if the long-delayed elections this month are free and fair, and that key steps are taken to achieve peace. At the same time, the UN's most powerful body said it is prepared to impose sanctions on anyone obstructing the work of independent electoral commission and the broader electoral process. Ivory Coast was split into a rebel-controlled north and government-controlled south after an attempted coup sparked a civil war in 2002. A peace deal in March 2007 brought key rebel leaders into administration, but deep divisions remain in the West African nation, which is the world's top cocoa producer. A date for elections has been set and missed 6 times, but there are hopes the first round of voting for president will take place on October 31st. Gbagbo's term officially expired 5 years ago.
Venezuela's government announces on Friday that it had taken over the country's Bancoro Bank, raising to 13 the number of financial institutions passing to state hands in the past year. Finance Minister Jorge Giordani said authorities decided to intervene in Bancoro, once Venezuela's 11th largest bank, because of serious liquidity problems and losses. Giordani said despite recovery plans, its directors have been unable to resolve this situation. He said 98% of the bank's depositors are covered by a state guarantee fund, and authorities have sufficient resources for most of its 177,115 customers. Between November 2009 and August, President Hugo Chávez's government has intervened in a number of banks for alleged irregularities or not meeting regulations. Canarias, Confederado, Provivienda, Bolivar, Central, Real Baninvest, Banorte, Micasa, Del Sol, Union and Federal have all come under state control. Authorities later reopened Bolivar Central, Confederado, Micasa and Banorte and merged them with the State Bank. Canarias, Banpro, Baninvest, Real, Union, Del Sol and Federal were liquidated. Chávez has said he will nationalize any bank that fails to meet strict guidelines and controls. Mexican Marines battled suspected drug cartel gunmen whose allies erected at least a dozen roadblocks in the northeastern city of Monterrey. According to a Navy statement, the gunmen opened fire and threw grenades at a Marine patrol on Thursday night on a highway on the western city limits. One Marine and 3 gunmen were killed in the firefight. At the same time, gang members used buses and other vehicles to block at least a dozen main avenues in downtown Monterrey. Such blockades have become a common cartel tactic across northeastern Mexico to impede security forces from calling in reinforcements during shootouts. The region has become one of Mexico's most violent this year since a turf war broke out between the Gulf Cartel and its former ally, the Zetas gang. The Navy statement said it suspected the gunmen belonged to the Zetas. 3 Marines were wounded, the Navy said. 2 of the 3 gunmen who died perished when their car caught fire during the shootout. Marines seized 3 assault rifles, 2 handguns and ammunition after the gunfight. The battle occurred as Nuevo León State Governor Rodrigo Medina gave a speech at the Monterrey City Hall on his first year in office. Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin's chief of staff was nominated Friday as Moscow's next mayor in a move seen as bringing the capital's sizable political and business interests under the direct control of the Kremlin. The Moscow City Legislature has to approve the nomination of Sergei Sobyanin, although that is widely seen as a formality. It also locks Putin's grip on power ahead of his presidential elections in 2012. President Dmitry Medvedev put forward Sobyanin's name. Putin appointed Sobyanin as his chief of staff in 2005 during his first presidency and hasn't ruled out another term as president as speculation mounts about whether he or Medvedev will run at the next election. Sobyanin is set to replace Yuri Luzkov, who was dismissed by Medvedev last month after 18 years in office. If confirmed, the appointment would bring the Kremlin greater control over politics and money flows in the capital. Luzkov was one of the last remaining power bases in Russian politics not under the direct influence of the central government. Protesters across France marched on Saturday against a new set of controversial pension reforms.
In Paris, balloons floated above the Boulevard du Temple as hundreds of workers protested against plans to make the French work until 62 before retiring. Protesters set off red flares, filling the avenue with thick smoke. The protests are part of a coordinated action that includes widespread strikes against French President Nicolas Sarkozy's proposal for pension reforms. Many consider the reforms to be an attack on well-deserved social protection, but the government says it's the only way to save the money-draining pension system and insists that people have to work longer because they are living longer. In Toulouse, in the south of the country, there were mass protests led by hundreds of trade union members who marched by shouting slogans. Footage showed members of General Confederation of Labour and Workers' Force trade unions protesting and holding banners. Similar demonstrations were also held in Marseille and Lyon. In Lyon, where 22 students were detained during protests on Thursday, protesters braved the rain to raise their voice against reforms. A protester who is a member of CGT said that he is fed up with protesting, but that the government leaves them with no choice. Workers at all 12 of France's fuel-producing refineries are now on strike after two plants owned by ExxonMobil and Petroplus voted to join the protest on Friday, according to a union coordinator at oil company Total SA. This is not only affecting the supply of fuel to petrol stations, but also to main airports. Police have forced the reopening of several oil depots to prevent fuel supplies running out. On Friday, students in some cities took to the streets, overturning rubbish bins, smashing bus stops and lighting fires. Several French labor unions have also announced another round of nationwide demonstrations next Tuesday.
Rescuers battled dangerous levels of gas, tons of coal dust and the risk of falling rocks as they worked to free 16 miners trapped by an explosion at a mine in central China early on Saturday. 21 miners were confirmed killed. Rescuers have located the 16 Chinese miners but must clear tons of coal dust from the mine shaft to reach them. It wasn't clear if the miners were alive or how far underground they were trapped. The blast unleashed more than 2,500 tons of coal dust, an engineer for one of the mine's parent companies reported. The report said ventilation has resumed in the mining pit, but gas levels remain high. The gas level inside the mine was 40% far higher than the normal level of near 1%, China Central Television reported. The gas wasn't specified, but methane is a common cause of mine blasts and coal dust is explosive. The more than 70 rescuers on the scene also must clear chunks of coal loosened by the blast that fell into the shaft. 20 bodies have been retrieved by the afternoon. China's state-run media had joined the breathless global coverage of the dramatic Chilean mine rescue, and the country's propaganda and mine officials likely will face pressure to be just as open about the progress of its rescue efforts. China's mining industry is the most dangerous in the world, with 2,600 people killed in accidents last year, and the country's leaders have been making a high-profile push in recent years to improve mine safety. Premier Wen Jiabao has even ordered mining bosses into the mines with their workers or else risk severe punishment. Paris airports are facing a possible fuel shortage as strike action against pension reform continues. Workers at all 12 of France's fuel-producing refineries are on strike after two plants owned by ExxonMobil and Petroplus voted to join the protest on Friday, according to a union coordinator at oil company Total SA. This is not only affecting the supply of fuel to gas stations, but also to main airports. Orly Airport is thought to still have fuel reserves to last more than a week, but the main Parisian airports, Roissy, Charles de Gaulle, might run out of fuel by the end of the week. Flight activity at both airports was unaffected as of Saturday morning, with flights running mostly on time. Some passengers showed little concern about a possible fuel shortage and seemed to think a solution would be found before the situation becomes critical. Saturday is a national demonstration day in France, with millions of people expected to protest against the pension reforms in Paris and the main French cities. French students and labor unions see President Nicolas Sarkozy's pension reform, raising the retirement age from 60 to 62, as an attack on their well-deserved social protection. The government says it is the only way to save the money-draining pension system and insists that people have to work longer because they are living longer. The Education Ministry said 306 high schools were affected to various degrees by strikes on Friday, down to 342 on Thursday.